Welcome to this YSL report builder tutorial. In this part of the series we'll explain how to highlight the min and max values in a table. We'll start with a quick recap of the min and max functions and talk a little bit about function scope and how you can influence that to affect the number of rows included in the min and max functions. We'll look at conditional formatting using the if and switch functions, and we'll apply that technique to highlight the min and max values for an entire table, and then do the same thing for groups in a table. So let's get started. Here's a quick example of the type of thing we're going to create. This table shows a list of films and their runtime in minutes, and we've organised the films into groups based on which genre they belong to. For each genre, we've highlighted the longest film in blue and the shortest film in orange. So in order to do that, we need to be able to compare the runtime for each film with the min and max runtime for all the films in the same group. If you want to follow along with the video, you'll need a copy of the YSL Movies database, and if you don't already have it installed, you can use this video to help you get it set up, and you'll find a link in that video's description that you can use to download the files you'll need. Assuming you have done that part already, I'm going to head over to Report Builder where I've got a blank report waiting for me. I'm going to right click on my data sources folder in the report data window and choose add data source. I'll call this data source movies, and then I'll use a connection embedded in the report pointing to a Microsoft SQL server. I'll click the build button on the right hand side and get a bit of help constructing my connection string. For the server name, I'll type in a shortcut to my local host, so // followed by the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm connecting to, which is SQL 2017. I can then select my movies database from the drop-down list further down the dialog box, click OK a couple of times, and there's my data source created. Next, I can create a dataset by right-clicking on the movies data source and choosing Add Dataset. I'll call this one Films, and then I'll use the Query Designer button at the bottom of the dialog box to help me select a list of tables and columns. I'll expand the Tables folder on the left-hand side, head to the Film table first. From here I'd like to select the title and the runtime minutes, and then I'll collapse that table, look at the genre table next, and I want to include both columns from that table, the genre ID and the genre. The quickest way to do that is just to tick the box next to the table name. I'll add a filter to show only films which have won at least one Oscar, just to limit the number of rows I return. So I'm going to click the Add Filter button over here, and then change the field name to Oscar Wins, change the operator to is more than or equal to, and then for the value, type in the number 1. Having done that, I can click OK, and then when my select statement has been generated, I can click OK again, and there's my dataset created. Next, I'd like to create a table which displays the list of film titles and runtime in minutes. I'll start by tidying up my report, so I'll delete this placeholder title text box and then remove the page footer. And then I can right-click into the report body and choose Insert Table. I'll assign the title and runtime minutes columns or fields to the first two columns of the table. Just to avoid the text rendering bug, often when you run a report with a basic table in it, it misses out some of the values, so you can see there are gaps in this list. Not all the film titles and runtimes have been displayed. A simple way to solve that little problem is to highlight all the cells in the table and then just change away from the default font to any other, and then just back to the default font, and that should force all the text to be actually rendered properly. Annoying, but there it is, that's what we have to do. I'll just tidy up a little further. I'll change the width of the title column so that I can hopefully read the entire film title on one single line. Maybe apply some basic background colour formatting to the title row. And then a quick run of that report, and that doesn't look too terrible at the moment. In order to highlight the longest and shortest films in the table, we'll need to rely on the max and min functions. And I'd like to have a quick recap on how those functions work first. So back into the design view, I'd like to add an extra footer row to the bottom of my table. So if I select any cell in the table to begin with, I can then right click on the details row selector at the left hand side and choose insert row, and I want to choose outside group below. I don't want another detail row that will be repeated for each film. I want a static row at the bottom of the table that appears once for the entire table. I would like to assign an aggregate function, either min or max, to the runtime minutes column, and an easy way to do that is if I click on the field selector button on the new static row and then choose to display the runtime minutes again, it will automatically apply the sum function to that field. but I can click on the word sum and then right click on the highlighted text, choose Summarize By, and then pick from any of the other aggregate functions. So I want to focus on max and min. I'll choose max for this first example, and then I'll type in a quick title at the end of this. I'll say longest run time. And then I'd like to insert another new row below that one to show the shortest runtime. So I'll right click and choose Insert Row Below. Notice I didn't need to pick whether it was inside or outside the group this time because there is no group on that row. I'll type in a little title, shortest runtime, and then in this cell I will pick the runtime minutes field again, click on the word sum and then right click, Summarize By, min. So max gives you the biggest value in a range of figures and min gives you the smallest value in a range of figures. A little bit of basic formatting just to make those stand out. And then when I've done this, I'll run the report, head to the last page, and we'll see the values for the longest and the shortest runtimes for the entire table. So to highlight the longest and shortest film in the table, we'll need to compare each individual film's runtime with the longest and shortest values we've just calculated. And that means that each individual row will also need to refer to the max and min functions. And that's going to cause us a small problem. Let's just have a quick look at what happens if we add the max runtime minutes expression to this blank column in the table. If we switch back to the design view, and then in the third column I'm going to pick the runtime minutes field again. Annoyingly, that applies a sum to the end of that column, which I'm going to then just delete. I won't need that. Because this is on a detail row, it hasn't assigned an aggregate function to the runtime minutes, but I can still do that by clicking on the value in the cell and then right clicking on it, choosing Summarize By, and then choose the function I want to use. So I'll go with max for this example. So if I then run the report, we'll see that the column that I've just generated showing the max of runtime minutes is apparently just showing the same value as the runtime minutes for each row. And that's because the max function, it being an aggregate function, has a default scope over which it calculates its value. If I apply the max function to a detail row, it finds for me the maximum value for all the runtimes in that detail row. And as there's only one of them, it simply shows me that value. What we'll need to be able to do is modify the scope of the max and min functions so that they look at the maximum runtime for all of the runtimes in the entire table. To make that work, if I switch back to the design view, I first of all need to know the name of the table whose scope I want to apply to the max function. A couple of ways to find that out. I can select a cell in the table and then I can right click on one of the grey boxes around the outside and then choose the TableX properties. The name will be displayed in the name property on the general page of the dialog box, so my table is currently called TableX1. I can change that if I like, if I wanted to make it more descriptive, but I'm reasonably happy with it being called TableX1 for now. Another place you can see that value is in the Properties window. If you head to the View tab in the ribbon and you tick the box for the Properties window, when you have the table selected, its name will be displayed at the top. And you can also modify that using the name property a little further down that window. What I'm going to do is head back to my max function in this third column, and I'm going to right click on the cell and choose expression. That will then open up the expression builder and show me what function has actually been added to that cell. It's not immediately obvious that I can do this from what's displayed for me so far, that I can change the scope of the max function. But if you were unsure about that, you could head to the common functions category, choose aggregate, and then find the max function in the list. And you'll see in the little examples in the bottom right hand corner, it shows you several different versions of using the max function. The first one shows you simply referencing a field, which is what we've done so far. And the second one shows you referencing a field, but then specifying the name of a scope. So what we're going to do is specify after the value of runtime minutes, we'll type in a comma, and then in some double quotes, we can type in the name of our table, which I've established is called TableX1. If I then close the double quotes, the entire expression should look like so. And then if I click OK and head back to the Home tab and run the report, I now see that the runtime minutes, or the max runtime minutes on each individual film, is shown as the same value as the max runtime for the entire table. So now we can create a conditional format which compares each individual film's runtime with the max runtime for the entire table. To do that, I'll head back to the design view, and then I'll highlight the entire details row in the table by selecting or clicking on the row selector button on the left hand side. I'll head over to my properties window to find the background colour property, click on the drop down arrow next to it, and then choose expression. I'll just get rid of whatever's in there at the moment, so no colour, I'll delete that. And I'll replace that by using an if function to check or to compare the runtime for the film with the maximum runtime for the table. So I can head to the common functions category and then the program flow section. I can double click the if function to have that inserted. And the first thing I need to do in the if function is write my conditional test, my conditional statement. I'm going to go to the fields list and then double click the runtime minutes field. And I'd like to ask if that is equal to the maximum runtime for all the films in the table. I could head to the aggregate category and then double click the max function. Back to the fields category and then double click runtime minutes. And then type in a comma and then in some double quotes the name of the table, which we found out was called table x1. After closing the double quotes, I can close the round brackets for the max function, and that's the entire logical test part written. What I need to do now is choose which colour to use if that condition is true. So I can type in a comma, and then I can head up to the constants category in the dialog box, and then pick a blue colour. I'm going to go for cornflower blue. I also need to state which colour to use if the runtime is not equal to the maximum runtime. So if I type in a comma, I can choose any other colour I like. I'll go with no colour or transparent as it's written out for me. I can then close the round brackets. The entire expression should look like so, if you just about make out transparent at the end there. And then having done that, I can click OK. If I run the report, it probably would have made sense to sort the table in descending order of runtime so we could find this easily. But if I scroll down a few pages down, I'll eventually encounter, I hope, there we go, a film with a blue background colour, so Cleopatra, a runtime of 248 minutes, which is equal to the maximum runtime for the entire table. We can basically do the same thing now to find films with the shortest runtime. Again, we'll have to specify the scope for the min function to make this work. Back to the design view, if I simply right click on the cell which contains currently the maximum runtime for the entire table, I can choose expression and then change the function from max to min. And again, we're specifying the scope of the table, so table x1. If I click OK and then run the report, we'll see that column now displays the minimum runtime for the entire table. So I can go back to the design view now. I'll highlight the details row in the table and then head back to the background colour expression where it says if, and then I can click on the drop down arrow and choose expression. Now we could carry on with the if function. We could write a nested if function to add more conditions, but you'll find that gets rapidly quite awkward to keep track of the number of round brackets that you've opened and closed. It's all a little bit messy. If you have multiple conditions to test for, it might be better to use a function called switch. And you'll find the switch function in the same category as the if function, so program flow. The switch function simply allows you to write a sequence of logical tests, and the first one that returns true is the one that you'll get. So let's tweak our existing if function. I'm going to take away the IIF and replace that with the word switch instead. Just for a slightly neater layout as well, I'm not going to try to write this on one single continuous line. I'm going to take the first argument down to the next line, so just after the round brackets press enter to take everything down to the next line, and then I'm going to type in a few spaces just to indent this code a little. I'm then going to head to the end of the cornflower blue, and just after the comma there, I'm going to hit enter a couple of times, and then again type in a few spaces to indent that part. So the switch function, the first pair of arguments is your first logical test and the answer you want to return if that logical test is true. You can then just repeat that pattern. You can add as many extra logical tests as you like, and as long as you provide an answer for each one, the switch function will just evaluate them in the order you write them. So the simplest thing to do here, I think, is just to copy and paste the comparison, the field's value against the maximum of the runtime minutes value. Paste that in on the next line. Change the function name from max to min. And then at the end of that, make sure you've got a comma, and then pick which colour you would like that row to be if the value of the runtime is equal to the minimum runtime. So I can head back to the constants category then and pick a different colour. I'll go for orange this time. I'll need to type in an extra comma after orange to move on to the last line. On the last line, I don't want to check if the runtime is not to the max and it's not to the min. There's a shortcut where you can just do an else clause for a switch statement. If I write the value true followed by a comma, if we reach this stage of the sequence of logical tests, whatever we write here should essentially return true. So rather than explicitly testing for it, we can shortcut that by just entering the logical value true. So the entire expression looks like this. If you're curious more about how the switch function works, we do have a separate video on that as part of this playlist. So if you fancy learning a bit more, we have other material available. But for now, with that done, I'm going to click OK. Run the report. I'll need to scroll down a little again to find my results, but I should now find at least one row, in fact in this case 2 rows, where I've got an orange background colour. So there are 2 films at least with the same minimum runtime, and we're still highlighting the maximum runtime for Cleopatra. Now I'd like to use this same technique to highlight the minimum and maximum values within groups in our table. So just having a look back at the example I showed at the beginning, I want to group my films so that they're groups by which genre they belong to, and then highlight the min and max runtimes in each individual group. To make that work, I'll need to group my table first. So let's head back to the design view of the report. And I can do this in a variety of ways, but I always tend to favour using the row groups panel to perform my grouping in a table. So I'm going to right click on the existing details item here, choose add group, and I'll make it a parent group. To choose the group by expression, I'm going to start by choosing the genre field. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'd like to display the name of the genre, and I'd like to alphabetically sort my groups by the genre name. I'll include just a group header at this point and then click OK. And then I'm just going to change the way the grouping works. So I chose genre initially to make it get displayed in the cell. What I'd like to do now is potentially improve the performance of the grouping by changing the group expression to group on the genre ID. So I'm going to right click on the genre group that I've just created and choose group properties, and then change the group on expression from genre to genre ID. You may find better performance when you're using a simple numeric value like an ID rather than the long text description, particularly when you have lots and lots of rows in your datasets. So having done that, I'd just like to tweak the formatting a little bit. One thing to watch out for, if I select any cell in this header row here, you'll see that the background colour has copied the same expression. And I don't really want my header row in the table, nor the header row on the header column on the left-hand side to use this expression to make its formatting work. I'm just going to, first of all, copy and paste these column headings from the very top row of the table into the first header row in the genre group. And then I'm also going to change the background colour of the initial column, the leftmost column that's been added for me here as well. So I'll just manually change that to the same colour as everything else. I'll then delete the header row from the table entirely, maybe do a little bit of extra formatting for the fonts of those sections, so I'll make the font bold. And at this point now, hopefully you can see that the expression for the background colour has been removed and simply replaced with the colour I've selected. So having done that, if I just run the report to see what we've ended up with, we've now got our films grouped by the genre to which they belong. So the next stage now is to calculate the minimum and maximum runtimes for all the films in the group. So our conditional formatting is still working currently. If I scroll down a little bit, I'll find the animation section and I can see the 2 shortest films being highlighted still in orange. If I scroll a little further, I should also be able to find Cleopatra there, still being highlighted in blue. So the conditional formatting is still working. We're currently calculating the min and max runtimes for the entire table. What I'd like to do now is modify that to find the min and max runtimes just for all the items in a single group. Back to the design view, and I'm going to just use my existing expression in the last column of the table to show you that as well as writing in the name of a table as the scope, you can also write in the name of a group. So I've just created a group whose name is genre. If I right click into that cell and choose expression, I can provide the name of the group rather than the name of the table as the scope. So I'll enter the word genre and the entire expression looks like so. So if I were to click OK and then run the report, you'll find now the minimum runtime we're calculating is different for each group. It's based on the minimum for all the items in the genre. So if we simply update our conditional formatting in the same way, back to the design view, I want to highlight all the cells in the detail row, and I'll go back to the background color property, find my switch function, click on the drop down arrow and then choose expression. All I need to do is replace the words tablix1 with the name of my group, genre, and I'll do that twice, of course. And then I can click OK, run the report again, and now we'll see individual formatting for the min and max runtimes in each different genre group. Just a final bit of tidying up. I don't really need that third column in the detail section. I can get rid of this min max runtime column, so I can head back to the design view and then I can right click at the top of that column and choose to delete it. And the final result doesn't look too shabby, I think. So there we go. It's a fairly basic technique, but an effective one for highlighting the minimum and maximum values in tables and groups. Hope you found some of that useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.